Coming up next, an address by Governor Mario Cuomo of New York. He discusses legislation dealing with the death penalty that the New York State Legislature passed in March. Governor Cuomo then vetoed the bill. The state legislature is expected to take up a veto override sometime in May or June.
Good morning. On behalf of the College of St. Rose community, I extend a warm welcome to everyone here today. Certainly, the issue Governor Cuomo will address, that of capital punishment, is gravely important. When the New York Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty asked the college to provide a forum for the examination of this critical issue, we agreed. In fact, the College of St. Rose views this as an opportunity to fulfill one of its roles as a liberal arts college, and more specifically, to provide a forum for the intellectual and moral examination of such issues. Before we begin, I would like to recognize a number of special guests who are with us today. Representing the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, Lee Dingerson. Representing the Association of the Bar, City of New York, Sheldon Elson. You may want to hold your applause. I've got a few more to go here. Representing New York State Coalition for Criminal Justice, Jim Murphy. Amnesty International, Len Rose Avila. Representing the New York State Civil Liberties Union, Alice Green, Barbara Shack, Norman Siegel. Representing the New York State Defenders Association, Wilford O'Connor. The New York State Council of Churches, Arleone Kelly. Representing New York Lawyers Against the Death Penalty, Ronald Tabak. The Hutterian Brethren, Reverend Daniel Moody. Representing the Pan-American Pan-African Association, Dr. Robert Starling Pritchard II. A number of assembly persons, Assemblyman Thomas DiNapoli, Assemblywoman Cynthia Jenkins, Assemblywoman Earlene Hill, Assemblyman Al Vann, Assemblyman Brian Murtaugh, Assemblyman Richard Connors, Assemblyman Jose Serrano, Assemblyman Joe Pilliteri, Assemblyman Anthony Genovese, Assemblyman Oliver Koppel, Mayor Karen Johnson from Schenectady, and Assemblywoman Barbara Clark. Like the governor, Bishop Howard Hubbard needs no lengthy introduction. The College of St. Rose community is always pleased to welcome this special person to our campus. Our friend, the Most Reverend Howard J. Hubbard, Bishop of Albany.
Governor Cuomo, Dr. Vaccaro, fellow religious leaders, honorable members of the legislature, friends all. It is truly a privilege for me this morning to have this opportunity to express, in the name of my brother Catholic bishops and other religious leaders of varied faith traditions, and in the name of citizens of conscience and conviction, our staunch opposition to the restoration of the death penalty in this, our Empire State. We in New York State today find ourselves at one of those critical moments in history when we are faced with a decision that will have a significant impact on the future course of our history, and that will also be a measure of the quality of our society. Within the next 2 months, the state legislature, as representatives of the family of New York, will make a decision about whether New York will reinstate the death penalty. As at any difficult juncture in human history, It is a great temptation to be influenced by the events of the times. Indeed, I am not unmindful of the terrible tragedies of recent days and months, whose victims have my heartfelt sympathy. Especially at this time, my concern goes out to all law enforcement officials and correction officers who risk their lives daily for the protection of the community. On a very personal note, one of my immediate family members serves as a New York State trooper. I am painfully aware of the potential for death he faces at the hands of a freaked-out junkie or trigger-happy thug each time he dons his uniform in the line of duty. And I know what a devastating blow this would be for his wife, his 2 preschool-aged daughters, and for the child they are expecting. I have also presided at the funeral of the victim of one of the most notorious serial killers in the history of this state, and have experienced firsthand the unspeakable grief and lifelong trauma such a brutal and senseless killing inflicted upon this innocent person's family. Further, I recognize from public opinion polls that many in society today favor the death penalty, although when offered a range of sentencing options, respondents in several polls have shown a preference for imprisonment rather than for execution. As powerful as the events of any moment may be, however, history has shown that much reward is given to those who maintain a steady course, guided by sound, fundamental moral principles. In this decision, the principles which guide the Catholic Church and which leads us to oppose the death penalty is that only God is the author of life, and therefore only God can take life away. Both in 1974 and again in 1980, the bishops of the United States declared our staunch opposition to capital punishment. In our statements of 1980, we bishops reaffirmed our commitment to the sacredness of life in relation to the death penalty, while acknowledging that the debate over the death penalty involves values of the highest importance: respect for the sanctity of human life, the protection of human life, the preservation of order in society, and the achievement of justice through law. Respect for the sacredness of life is eroding everywhere we look today. Drug dealers have no reverence for it. Abortion has become the tragic but inevitable end product of our throwaway society, which devalues everything, including the innocent unborn. The TV screen has brought into our homes the killing field of a school playground. Child abuse becomes lethal. Such blatant disregard for the sacredness of human life will further deteriorate if we adopt a policy of killing an individual as an acceptable approach to solving our problem of crime. Beyond this central concern for upholding the sacredness of life, which underlies our opposition to capital punishment, the Catholic Church has other reasons for opposing the death penalty. While some argue that the existence of the death penalty will deter crime, there is no research which demonstrates the validity of that contention. In fact, so much violent crime occurs through emotion or drug-induced irrational behavior that it would seem evident that a perpetrator would in no way be influenced by the existence of the death penalty. Indeed, in states like Texas and Florida, which have restored the death penalty and exercised it, the homicide rates have increased significantly. Research also reveals that where it exists in this country, the death penalty has been administered inequitably. It has been shown that minority defendants are much more likely to be sentenced to death than white defendants for the same crime. In addition, those who receive the death penalty are overwhelmingly poor, inadequately educated, and represented by public defenders or court-appointed lawyers who frequently, because of the burden of staggering caseloads, cannot provide a comprehensive defense for those charged with capital offenses. Finally, recent research indicates that there is at least one innocent person killed among every 20 executions which are carried out. Cases of wrongful conviction are gruesome reminders that our criminal justice system is not foolproof. Unlike other criminal punishments, however, the death penalty allows for no adjustments once injustice has occurred. I could continue providing other arguments against the death penalty, but I will conclude my remarks by referring to my initial theme, namely, what is at stake in this decision is a measure of the morality, the humanness, and the civility of our society, and of how we view the sanctity of human life. Potent as may be the forces of the movement leading to the direction of restoring the death penalty, we must step back and take a longer view of the fundamental principles which must guide us. As former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld often stated in times of crisis, only the person who keeps one's eye on the far horizon will find the right road. I commend Governor Cuomo for his unswerving courage in annually vetoing the death penalty. I applaud the members of the New York State Assembly and Senate who have opposed capital punishment in the face of enormous political pressures to the contrary. I urge them to hold firm to their convictions in anticipation of the inevitable attempt to override a gubernatorial veto. Finally, I plead with those men and women of the state legislature who have supported the restoration of the death penalty to reconsider their vote on this urgent issue concerning the sacred dignity of human life. State-sanctioned execution is not and cannot be the way for a humane and civilized society to deal with the very real and seriously escalating problem of violent crime. For violence only begets violence, and this hellish cycle diminishes all of us, guilty and innocent alike. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Bishop Hubbard. I am pleased to welcome Governor Mario Cuomo to the College of St. Rose, and I am doubly pleased that he has decided to share with us his views on the critically important issue of capital punishment. This is a concern that not only affects us as citizens of New York State, but also as citizens of the United States and beyond. We recognize that it is a complex, multifaceted matter, and therefore, we hope its examination in this type of forum will assist each of us to better inform our conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, the Governor of New York State.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Vaccaro, Dr. Boeke, Your Excellencies, Bishop Hubbard and Bishop Ball, Rabbi Martin Silverman, members of the clergy, distinguished leaders of the State Assembly, and I note that Ed Sullivan has joined us since the names were read, members of the coalition, ladies and gentlemen. It is, as you've already heard, difficult to imagine a more important subject for consideration than the one that brings us together this morning. Together, the legislature and the governor every year make thousands of judgments that are important. But as both the bishop and Dr. Vaccaro have noted, occasionally we're confronted with a question that has transcendent significance, one that describes in fundamental ways what we are as a people, one that projects to ourselves and to the whole world our most fundamental values, one even that helps configure our souls. This is the right setting for such a discussion here at the College of St. Rose, surrounded by excellent leaders like Bishop Hubbard and Bishop Ball and Rabbi Silverman and so many clergymen. Right, not because it is a Christian or a Jewish setting or even a religious setting. Right, because this is a place and these are people who believe in reason, enlightenment, and the uplifting of the human condition. The question that confronts us is whether this state should choose to kill human beings by electrocution as punishment for commission of the crime of murder. I have spoken my own opposition to the death penalty for more than 30 years. For all that time, I have studied it, I have watched it, I have debated it hundreds of times. I have heard all the arguments. I've analyzed all the evidence I could find. I've measured public opinion when it was opposed, when it was indifferent, when it was passionately in favor. And always before, I have concluded the death penalty is wrong, that it lowers us all, that it is a surrender to the worst that is in us, that it uses a power, the official power to kill by execution, which has never elevated a society, never brought back a life, never inspired anything but hate. In recent years, I've had the privilege of casting my vote on bills passed by the legislature to bring back the death penalty. And I have voted against it each time. And on each occasion that I did, the legislature might have passed the bill despite my disapproval by obtaining a 2/3 vote. So far, they have chosen not to. Now the death penalty bill is before me again, and there can be another chance for the legislature of this state to speak on this subject in the name of the people they represent. Because of the awesome significance of the matter and the imminence of the decision, I sought a chance to speak directly to the public so that I could add my voice to and underscore the cogency of the arguments made by the bishop, the assembly people, and so many of you, and made already so cogently, so forcefully, so eloquently. I thank Dr. Vaccaro, the College of St. Rose, and the Coalition for providing me this opportunity. Now, clearly there is a new public willingness to return to the official brutality of the past by restoring the death penalty. And it is just as clear what has provoked this new willingness. Life in parts of this state and nation has become more ugly and violent than at any time I can recall. Many like myself who have spent more than 50 years in this state are appalled at the new madness created by drugs and frustrated by what appears to be the ineffectuality of the federal, state, and local governments to deal with this new problem. Savage murders of young, bright, and committed law enforcement people and other citizens enrage us all. Our passions are inflamed by each new terrible headline, each new report of atrocity. We know the people have a right to demand a civilized level of law and peace. They have a right to expect it. And when it appears to them that crime is rampant and the criminal seems immune from apprehension and adequate punishment and that nothing else is working, then no one should be surprised if the people demand the ultimate penalty. It has happened before. It will probably happen again. To a great extent, it is a cry, a terrible cry of anger, anguish, born of frustration and fear in the people. I know that. I understand it, as does the bishop, as do all of you. I have been with the victims, too. I have felt the anger myself more than once. Like too many other citizens of this state, I know what it is to be violated, and even to have one's closest family violated in the most despicable ways. I tremble at the thought of how I might react to someone who took the life of my son. Anger, surely, terrible anger. I would not be good enough to suppress it. Would I demand revenge? Perhaps even that. I know that despite all my beliefs, I might be driven by my impulses. So how could I not understand a society of people like me, at times like this, wanting to let out a great cry for retribution, for vindication, even for revenge, like the cry we hear from them now? I understand it. But I know something else. I know this society should strive for something better than we are, what we are, in our worst moments. When police officers are killed, violence escalates, and lawlessness seems to flourish with impunity, it isn't easy for people to hold back their anger, to stop and think, to allow reason to operate. But that, it seems to me, is the only rational course for a people constantly seeking to achieve greater measures of humanity and dignity for our civilization. And so for a few moments, let's try, just try, to reason our way to a solution. Now, we need to respond more effectively to the new violence. We know that. But there is, as the bishop has pointed out, absolutely no good reason to believe that returning to death will be any better an answer now than it was at all the times in the past when we had it, when we used it, when we regretted it, and when we discarded it. There are dozens of studies that demonstrate there is simply no persuasive evidence that official state killing can do anything to make any police officer or other citizen safer. There is, in fact, considerable evidence to the contrary. Consider just this. For the decade before 1977, we had the death penalty in New York State. And in that period, 80 police officers were slain. For the decade after, without the death penalty, 54 were killed. The argument for deterrence is further weakened by realization of how rarely and unpredictably it's applied. For hundreds and hundreds of years, we've known that the effectiveness of the law is determined not by its harshness, but by its sureness. And the death penalty has always been terribly unsure. The experts at the New York State Bar Association's Criminal Justice Section and the Association of the Bar of the City of New York have come out strongly against the death penalty after hundreds of years of cumulative lawyers' experience and study. And one of the points that State Section made is that the death penalty must be regarded as ineffective as a deterrent, if for no other reason than because its use is so uncertain. Execution has occurred in only about 0.05% of all the homicides committed in America over the past decade. And then, despite Ted Bundy, it seems to threaten white drug dealers, white rapists, white killers, white barbarians a lot less than others. Think of this. Of the last 18 people executed in this state of New York, 13 were black and 1 Hispanic. And that seems an extraordinary improbability for a system that was operating with any kind of objective sureness. And there's more. Some of the most notorious recent killings, like the gunning down of the DEA agent Everett Hatcher and the killing by Lemuel Smith, occurred in the face of existing death penalty statutes. And psychiatrists will tell you that there is reason to believe that some madmen like Ted Bundy may even be tempted to murder because of a perverse desire to challenge the electric chair. For years and years, the arguments have raged over whether the death penalty is a deterrent. That used to be, frankly, the only argument when I first began debating it. But the truth is now that because the proponents have never been able to make the case convincingly from deterrence, they have moved now to a different argument. It's phrased in many ways, but in the end it all comes down to the same impulse. And it was heard in the debates on the floor of the Senate and the Assembly, which I listened to and read with great care. Here's what you could have heard in those debates in recent weeks, things like this. Whatever the studies show, the people of my area believe that the taking of life justifies the forfeiting of life. Or, our people have the right to insist on a penalty that matches the horror of the crime. Or even this. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Where would it end? You kill my son, I kill yours. You rape my daughter, I rape yours. You mutilate my body, I mutilate yours. You treat someone brutally, and I, the established government of one of the most advanced states in the most advanced nation on earth, will respond by officially and deliberately treating you brutally, by strapping you to a chair and burning away your flesh for all to see, so the barbarians will know that we are capable of official barbarism. And we will pursue this course despite the lack of reason to believe that it will protect us, even if it is clear almost with certainty that occasionally the victim of our official barbarism will be innocent. Think of it. At least 23 people are believed to have been wrongfully executed in the United States since the turn of this century. 23 innocent people officially killed, but it is not called murder. And tragically, New York State, our great state, the Empire State, holds the record for the greatest number of innocents put to death over the years. We lead all the states in the nation with 8 wrongful executions since 1905. Here are the names of the victims of the state of New York official killings: Charles Becker, Frank Sirofisi, Thomas Bambrick, Stefan Zishoviak, Rebarczyk, Everett Applegate, George Chu Wing, Charles Spurna. These are real names. These are real people, like Mario Cuomo or Ralph Marino, like Mel Miller, or Fred Orenstein, like Clarence Rapelier, or Joe Serrano, or Al Vann, or your son, or your father, or your mother. Real people who were killed innocently. The proponents of the death penalty in this state assume that the criminal justice system will not make a mistake. They seem to be unconcerned about the overly ambitious prosecutor, the sloppy detective, the incompetent defense counsel, the witness with an axe to grind, or the judge who keeps courthouse conviction box scores. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is the human factor, and it's the deepest, most profound flaw in their argument. In this country, a defendant is convicted on proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not proof to an absolute certainty. There's no such thing as absolute certainty in our law. The proponents of the death penalty, despite this, say we should pretend it cannot happen. They do not discuss the infamous case of Isidore Zimmerman, who got so far as to have his head shaved and his trouser leg slit on the day of his scheduled examination in 1939. Think of it. Before Governor Lehman commuted his sentence to life imprisonment. And then 24 years later, Zimmerman was released from prison after it was determined that the prosecutor knew all the time that he was innocent and had suppressed evidence. Zimmerman died a free man just a few years ago. They do not discuss William Red Gurgel, age 62, released in Queens just this year after spending 535 days in jail for a triple murder he did not commit. It was a case of mistaken identity. They do not discuss a young man named Bobby McLaughlin of Marine Park, Brooklyn. Bobby McLaughlin was convicted of the robbery and murder of another young man in 1980. His was a one-witness identification case, the most frightening kind. In July of 1986, Bobby McLaughlin was released after serving 6 years for a murder that he did not commit. Wrongly convicted by intention or mistake, take your pick of the facts, right here in the great state of New York. It all started when a detective picked up one wrong photograph, one mistake, one date with the electric chair, It could have been one more tragically lost life. It didn't happen. But it took an almost superhuman effort by his foster father and some aggressive members of the media to keep this case from falling between the cracks of the justice system. And Bobby McLaughlin had this to say after he was released, and this is his quote: "If there was a death penalty in this state, I would now be ashes in an urn on my mother's mantle." Yes, it can happen, and it will again, if we allow it to. And what would we tell the wife? What would the governor tell the wife then? Or the husband, or the children, or the parents of the innocent victim that we had burned to death in our official rage? What would you say to them? We had to do it. And then we would be asked, but why did you have to do it? If you were not sure it would deter anyone else, why did you have to do it? And what would we answer? Because we were angry? Because the people demanded an eye for an eye, even if it were to prove an innocent eye? What would we tell them? Should we tell them that we had to kill because we had as a society come to believe that the only way to reach the most despicable among us was to lie down in the muck and mire that spawned them? I hear all around me as governor that the situation has so deteriorated that we need to send a message to the criminals and to the people alike that we as a government know how bad things are and we will do something about it. I agree. Of course, we must make clear that we intend to fight the terrible epidemic of drugs and violence. But the death penalty is no more effective a way to fight them than the angry cries that inspire it. We need to continue to do the things that will control crime by making the apprehension and punishment of criminals more likely. We've made a good beginning. Since 1983, we've increased funding for local law enforcement alone by 65%. Added 500 troopers, 13,000 new prison beds. We'll be adding another 4,000 by 1990. We've tripled the number of drug felons sentenced to state prison and increased dramatically our rehabilitation efforts. We should do more. The legislature should be giving me the forfeiture bills I've asked for. I hope they will. Those bills will allow us to take the wealth away from the drug dealers and put it to use fighting them and rehabilitating people who have been caught and who are addicted to drugs. They should give me the judges I've asked, the troopers, the money for courts and prisons, the rehabilitation programs. And one other thing. The legislature should finally vote for a real, tough, effective punishment for deliberate murder. And there is one, better, much better than the death penalty. One that juries will not be reluctant to give. One that is so menacing to a potential killer, it could actually deter, I believe. One that does not require us to be infallible in order to avoid taking innocent life. One that does not require us to stoop to the level of killers. One that is, even for those who insist on measuring this question in dollars, millions of dollars less expensive than the death penalty. Millions. True life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. No possibility of parole. None under any circumstances. If you committed a murder at 20 and you live to be 81, you'll live 61 years behind bars. You go in alive and you come out only when you die. Now that's a tough penalty. Ask the people who know how tough this penalty would be. I've been there, I've talked to them. I've had some who went through the choice. Ask the people who know Attica or Auburn. Ask the people who know how hard such places are. They will tell you that to most inmates, the thought of living a whole lifetime behind bars only to die in your cell is worse than the quick, final termination of the electric chair. Anecdotal evidence is limited, of course, in its usefulness, but it can give you an insight. Just recently, in an article in the New York Times Magazine, a young man on death row named Heath Wilkins was asked whether people underestimated the deterrent power of life without parole. Absolutely, Wilkins responded. Death is not a scary thing to someone who's hurting inside so bad that they're hurting other people. People like that are looking for death as a way out. Now, for the 6 years I've offered it to the legislature, I've heard no substantial arguments in opposition to the proposal for life imprisonment without parole. I've heard none. If they fail once again this year to achieve their preferred choice, the electric chair, I hope the legislature will put aside any temptations simply to preserve a political issue and instead find what I believe is a smarter, saner, more effective answer by adopting real life imprisonment without parole. Finally, while we are fighting the criminals in the street with the relentless enforcement of firm laws and with swift, sure punishment, we must at the same time continue to do all the things we know dull the instinct for crime. Education, housing, health care, good jobs, and the opportunity to achieve them. All the old-fashioned effort to deal with root causes that has never lost its relevance, even when it lost its popularity. And that, in the end, I think personally, may be the best antidote of all against the kind of terrible crime we're now experiencing. Certainly, it offers us more hope than does the politics of death. Now, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, there will be few questions more difficult for us than the one that we now face, and few opportunities as good as this to prove our commitment as a people to resisting the triumph of darkness and to moving our society constantly toward the light. For a politician like the people from the Assembly who have joined us today, and myself, rejecting what appears to be a politically popular view can be troublesome. But I, as they do, make the same decision I have before. In my case, I make the same decision now that I have for more than 30 years. This time, I believe, on the basis of even more evidence, and with a firmer conviction even than before. And I do it with a profound respect for the people who have raised their voices and occasionally even their fists, asking for the death penalty. I have not, as governor, ignored those voices. I have listened intently to them. But after the sincerest effort, I have not been able to bring myself to agree with them heartily. I continue to believe with all my mind and heart that the death penalty would not help us. It would debase us. That it would not protect us. It would make us weaker. I continue to believe more passionately now than ever that this society desperately needs this great state's leadership. We, the people of New York, ought now, in this hour of fright, to show the way. We should refuse to allow this time to be marked forever in the pages of our history as the time that we were driven back to one of the vestiges of our primitive condition. Because we were not strong enough, because we were not intelligent enough, because we were not civilized enough to find a better answer to violence than violence. Today, I will veto the death penalty bill sent to me by the legislature and return it with my proposal for life imprisonment